Okay, so today I'm going to do a review of the MrSpeakers Alpha Dog headphone. Unfortunately, I don't have that unit with me right now. It was part of the Alpha Dog headphone tour around the United States, and so I no longer have that with me, but I can tell you guys how I did the test for comparing the sound quality between different things and how it sounds in general. So to get started, I'll tell you guys about my rig, and then I'll move into the sound quality, and then the overall build and finish, I guess. And so I was intending to use the Alpha Dog as a portable headphone, so I would have my iPod Video 5th Gen with the Wolfson DAC, or I'd use my iPhone, which I'm using to record, so I can't really show you guys, or just as a quick test with the Sansa clip zip. And it actually didn't sound too bad straight out of the clip zip with no amp, just from the 3.5mm headphone jack, but it didn't sound optimal at all. The bass was kind of woolly and not well defined, but it did have nice extension, and the mid-range was a bit lacking. It seemed pretty laid back and not engaging at all. So moving up to the iPod Video, it did sound a little better. Again, not the most optimal, but it had a wider soundstage and the bass was more well defined and it was just cleaner sounding. But after adding an amp such as the JDS Lab C5, it definitely improved. The C5 is pretty much like the O2 based on my reviews and listening tests, so the differences between the C5 and the O2 were pretty much the same with the Alpha Dog. So I have the O2 right here, and so I was basically using the iPod Video with the C5 and the O2 together, or not together, but just comparing the two. And I actually like this combo. I did use this on the bus one day to go to school. It's not the most portable headphone to bring around because it's the Alpha Dog is just so big and bulky, but you can use it as a portable headphone. It provides really nice noise isolation, and so it allows you to hear more of your music rather than the background noise. And so I actually liked the Alpha Dog for that, and that it had good noise isolation, so I didn't need to turn up the volume quite as loud with these amps compared to the V-Moda, which has a lot less, in my opinion, noise isolation. So apart from my portable rig, I also have my desktop rig, which is my MacBook Pro, which I'm using to record the audio right now. And I was playing that with the Objective DAC, and basically I think the O2 and the ODAC were the best combo that I have in terms of sound quality, so I can evaluate the Alpha Dog from that perspective. And so with this combo, the Alpha Dog was actually very pleasantly surprising to me. I was expecting it to be kind of like the Mad Dog. If you've heard the Mad Dog, it kind of sounds like the Audeze LCD2, not quite as articulate. But comparing the Mad Dog to the Alpha Dog, it was pretty surprising how different they sounded, even though they're using the same exact driver, the standard Fostex T50RP driver. So it was just really surprising to me how different they sounded. So comparing the two, the Mad Dog to me sounded a little more bassier, as well as more congested sounding, and then the Alpha Dog is just very expansive, and for a closed back headphone, I was actually really surprised at how large the soundstage was. And so basically the soundstage is in your head. If you're closing your eyes, where are the instruments around you? Are they far away, very deep? Are they very widely spread apart? So that is my definition of the soundstage. And for a closed back headphone, I thought the Alpha Dog actually had a pretty large soundstage. That being said, moving on to the what I call instrument separation. So is this instrument separate from this instrument over here? Is this instrument bleeding into that other instrument over there? And so with my setup right here with the MacBook, the Alpha Dog had pretty good instrument separation. I wouldn't say it's the best. It was still not quite optimal for classical, in my opinion, because the instrument separation just wasn't as good as what I'm used to with the open back headphones that I have, which include the AKG K701, which I absolutely love for classical music. And over here I have the Stax SR207. And so compared to these, of course, the instrument separation wasn't as good because the Alpha Dog is a closed back headphone, but it wasn't bad for a closed back headphone. I actually like the Alpha Dog for most music genres. Yeah, just mainly not classical, but it had a very engaging sound signature overall with decent enough instrument separation that I liked it with a lot of instrumental music, such as guitar or acoustic rather. Some percussion, I'll get to that later, but I find that the treble is not quite as engaging as what I'm used to, so it wasn't quite as good for genres that focus on the treble, such as rock, but it wasn't bad. I'd say overall it's a pretty good headphone for most music genres. Alright, so instrument separation. After that, oh yes, imaging. So a lot of people tend to combine the terms of instrument separation and imaging as one term called imaging, but I like to differentiate them because to me it's a little different. So to me, instrument separation is, again, how well defined is this instrument from this instrument from this instrument, whereas imaging is more in the soundstage, depth and width. Where are the instruments around my head? Are they over here to the center right? Are they over here to the center left? Are they straight in the center? Are they to the left? Are they to the right? So it's a little bit different to me, and I found that the Alpha Dog had really good imaging. I was able to distinguish where the instruments are playing, but not necessarily differentiate each instrument individually. So the instrument separation, again, wasn't as optimal as I would like, but the imaging was great. And that combined with the pretty big soundstage of the Alpha Dog, I really enjoyed just the overall soundstage experience as a whole. Alright, so that being said, soundstage, instrument separation, and imaging are taken care of. So let's move on to the bass. So I actually like the bass of the Alpha Dog. To me, it was a little bit elevated, but I can't actually say if it is. There's no real concrete measurements out there right now, but to me it sounded a little bit elevated, so it had really good extension in the bass. I was able to listen to a lot of electronic music and Massive Attack's Teardrop song. I really like that song, and the sub bass was pretty good. I wouldn't say it's the most prominent aspect of the headphone sound signature, but it definitely has good extension. Not quite as much as the super bassy V-Moda Crossfade M100, of course, because that's a pretty bassy headphone in the first place, but still pretty good bass. Moving on to the mid bass, I wouldn't say the Alpha Dog has the most punchy bass, but it definitely has good impact. I honestly thought the Mad Dog had a punchier bass than the Alpha Dog. So if you like electronic music, I would honestly recommend the Mad Dog, the newest one, the version 3.2 with the alpha pads, instead of the Alpha Dog for that kind of music. But that just might be me. And then moving on to the mid-range, the Alpha Dog had a really great lower mid-range. So if you listen to soul or pop music with male vocals or R&B, a lot of things that kind of emphasize the bass and lower mid-range area, I really think the Alpha Dogs are great for that kind of music genre. I really enjoyed soul with this. It's probably one of my most favorite headphones for soul music, actually. I just really enjoyed it, as well as smooth jazz. So artists such as Foreplay, that was really amazing. That being said, moving on to the upper mid-range. To me, the upper mid-range wasn't quite as clear sounding compared to the lower mid-range, and that might be due to the lack of air that I can sense in the overall presentation of the headphone, which I'll get later into the treble. But to me, the female vocals and just the upper mid-range in general seemed a little lacking in air. So what that means is female voices have that kind of, I hate to use the same word in the definition, but it has this airy presentation. It's very light and kind of just not as, I guess it's more of a focus on the higher frequencies for that kind of sound. But just to me, it didn't sound quite as good for female vocals. They weren't bad, but I wouldn't say it's the most optimal, because I'm used to more clear upper mid-range headphones like the AKGs and the Stacks, and so that might be a little biased for that. But to me, the air just wasn't as prominent with the Alpha Dog, so that was a bit of a let point for me. But overall, the mid-range seemed pretty, I guess it was more laid back than the AKGs, which is a little more forward than what I think the recording is supposed to be. So it wasn't a distant sounding mid-range, it wasn't a forward sounding mid-range either, so I guess it was kind of in between the two extremes. It's hard to quantify that. And then finally, moving on to the treble. Sorry, letting the car pass by. So moving on to the treble, kind of what I was talking about in the upper mid-range, I don't think the Alpha Dog had a lot of air to it, and so that might contribute to the instrument separation that I was talking about earlier, is that there's not a lot of air between instruments. So things such as cymbal hits had sparkle, which is nice, but cymbal crashes didn't seem to be as prominent, and so I think there's also a slight treble roll-off as well. So that might contribute to the lack of air that I'm hearing between the treble and the upper mid-range section, but I'm not completely sure about that. So to me, the treble just wasn't quite there to me. And what I mean by there is that it was present, but it wasn't as engaging. So something like the Stacks or the AKGs have really good extension, and the Stacks in particular, compared to the Alpha Dog, just have more, I guess, energy in that section of the frequency spectrum. And so maybe that contributes to what I'm hearing as a lack of air, is that I'm used to hearing the treble response from those two headphones. Alright, so that takes care of the sound in general. Let's see, moving on to different amps, I guess. And so like I mentioned earlier, the JDS Lab C5 and the Objective 2 kind of have a similar sound signature. So using the Alpha Dog between them, it was pretty much the same experience I had with my V-Mojas, is that the O2 was a little more expansive and more smooth, I guess, whereas the JDS Labs was more intimate, so the mid-range was a little more forward, which is, I think, better for portable mobile listening, as well as having a narrower soundstage. On the other hand, I also have the FIO E12 portable headphone amplifier, and let's see if I can balance this. Alright, cool. So I have the E12 as well, and the E12 I think has the most power output out of my two external headphone amplifiers at 32 ohms. So I think it's the most powerful in that regards for the Alpha Dog. I would not say that E12 was the best pairing with the Alpha Dog on the other hand, despite having more power, which doesn't necessarily mean much, but it's just something that a lot of people talk about, is that the E12 has a lot of power to drive these bigger headphones. But I actually thought the Alpha Dog sounded better out of the C5 and the O2 compared to the E12. So with the E12, it was really evident to me that the soundstage was collapsed in terms of the width, and so that was kind of a bummer. And the upper mid-range was a little more harsh to me, so I always thought the E12 was a little bright sounding, and that's most evident with upper mid-range sounds like the violin. So kind of sounds in the 4 kilohertz to, I would say 8 kilohertz range is what defines brightness, and I think the E12 is a bit bright for me. So that being said, these were all comparisons without bass boost, without the crossfeed, all on low gain. So on the O2, I have the gain set at 1.0x gain, so unity gain as they call it. The C5's on the stock low gain, which is I believe 2.3x, and then the E12 set on low gain. I'm not quite sure. Sorry about that, I lost my train of thought because I got a phone call, but yeah, so I don't know what the gain is on the E12, but I believe the high gain is plus 16 decibels, so I used everything on the lowest settings to have the best sound quality. So I was doing all of these amp comparisons as well as my sources with the iPod video and my iPhone and the Samsung Clip Zip. I was doing all those comparisons with the FIO headphone switcher too, and so a lot of my comparisons were done by using a 1 kilohertz sine wave generated from Audacity and just trying to volume match between the different amps and sources. And so all of my comparisons were, I would say, pretty fair, and I like the Alpha Dog the most out of the Objective 2 and ODAC combo when connected to my MacBook, which is recording the audio right now. I also used a custom portable headphone amplifier made by a friend. If you've heard of, I don't think you've heard of it, but there's an amp called Project Palaios, I believe that's how you say it, but this is the prototype of it, and it was pretty good sounding. It was almost as good as the C5, maybe a little better. It had a better bass extension and just a little more impact in the bass compared to the C5. But if you're interested, Project Palaios is, I believe it's available for $230 now. It's powered by a 9-volt battery, so I actually thought that paired pretty well with the Alpha Dog, to be honest. But this video is way too long, so I will end it here. Just some closing remarks. I liked the Alpha Dog. Great noise isolation, pretty good sound quality for a closed back headphone. Big question is it worth $600? To me, I think it is. Despite the kind of lack of air that I sense with the treble and the upper mid-range, I really enjoyed it for just the mid-range in general, especially for the lower mid-range. And I thought the bass was pretty good to enjoy it with a lot of music genres that are bassier, such as electronic music. So I actually have a good collection of electronic music, and I actually enjoyed it with the Alpha Dog. So that's my closing remarks. The Alpha Dog retails for $600 or $599 to be exact in the US, and you can buy it with the XLR pin input, which is a balanced connection, or you can buy it with a standard 6.3 millimeter output, just like this, from the AKGs. And so thank you for watching. Sorry this was a long video. Have a good day, and I'll see you guys soon.